In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. I'm Greg Stevens, your host, and today we have Kathy Miller. Now, Kathy is someone I'm about to get to know, and met her on LinkedIn, and I loved her. She had a book called Toes and Stilettos. I thought that is a great title of a book, and someone who has a title like that, I want to get to know, and I want to do it on my podcast. So, Kathy, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thanks so much for the invitation, Greg. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you. So, Kathy, let's talk first about steel toes and stilettos, but you're not here to really talk about that. You're here to talk about a situation with your daughter, and we'll get to that in a minute. That's the inspirational piece. But in getting to know you, tell us a little about that book because it really caught my attention.
Yeah, so I wrote it with a very good friend of mine, my co-author, Shannon Carls, and we were reflecting on a time we had worked together previously and just were thinking about what was so special about that time. How were we able to get really good business results? And as we started to talk more and more about it, we thought, you know what? We have a really good story. And so we're going to write it. And there's a couple aspects to the story. So I was a general manager at the time, running a $75 million division of a large global company. And she was my transformation leader. I was running the P&L, and we transformed not only the plants, but the offices into less batch and more lean principles. And our results really were tremendous. But I think the big key to it was the inclusive culture that we created, where we gave people an opportunity to contribute with their hearts and minds, not just their hands. And that helped with the sustainability. So we said, hey, we should share our story. And so the next day, Shannon called me and she said, I dreamt about a title, Steel Toes and Stilettos. And we tell the story. We go back and forth between my perspective and her perspective and talk about how we transformed the business. So there's a lot of lessons in there about leadership. There's also a lean manufacturing, lean enterprise roadmap in terms of the steps that we took to get there. And there's also an aspect in it about friendship and the relationships that we make along the way. We really wanted to inspire and put a book out in the world about women who support their entire teams, including other women in the workforce, because sometimes that's a difficult area.
Oh, absolutely. I teach transformational work in organizations and think it's so important that we empower not just women, but everyone to have their voice back. That's one of the things that when I teach crucial conversations, I tell people I'm about to give you your voice back. Those things you've never felt like you've been able to say. I want to be able to give them to you because it doesn't mean you always get your way, but it does
No,
mean you have a voice, that you are noticed, that you have a contribution, and that contribution is needed for people to solve problems. And we
could
don't
not
hear
agree
from,
with you more.
yeah, we don't hear from them. We'll never get there. But when we empower them, it's amazing how that runs through the culture of an organization. So I love the work you're doing. But let's shift gears. You have a story you really wanted to talk about with your daughter, and I'm excited to hear it. So give us a little background. What's her name, and where did this story originate?
Yeah. So her name is Claire. I have two daughters, Emily and Claire. Emily's the oldest, and Claire is the youngest. And as comes out in this in Steel Toes and Stilettos, we're entire beings. I'm not just a general manager and then a mom,
Right.
but it's how you incorporate all those things in your life and try to be successful as you make the choices and have to do that in between. So this story happened when Claire was in about sixth grade, and Claire had some learning difficulties, and her older sister did not. She was your stereotypical top 10%. I was getting ready to go to work one day and get them off to school. So, you know how those mornings are, right? Where you're like, here's your lunch money. Did you get your homework done? When you're running around looking for your heels and your briefcase and trying to have meaningful conversations to start your girls off right. And there's literally, I can't remember when I had dinner last night, but I remember this conversation as though it was yesterday. And it went something like this. I asked Emily, what are you looking forward to about school today? And she said, oh, a lot of things, Mom. It'll be fine. She said, but one thing that really bothers me is in social studies, I have to work on a group project. And I would just as soon do it myself because I end up doing all the work and all these things. And it's just so stressful to me. I don't know why we have to work in groups. And I'm like, okay. As I'm like grabbing the apples, throwing them in a bag and whatnot, and not think, I'm like, oh, this is a good coaching moment. And I'm like, Emily, no matter what, everybody has somewhere to contribute. And this is a good chance to practice your patience skills and help others learn things that you think are helpful. And I'm sure, like, when I turned my back, I was getting a big eye roll. But Claire all of a sudden piped up. I didn't even know she was listening. And she said, you know, Sissy, when I go to school and I have to work in groups, everybody just ignores me. And that makes me feel invisible. And I stopped dead in my tracks. It was as painful, I believe, as someone literally taking a butcher knife and putting it in my heart. And I thought to myself, how insightful and articulate, right? To be able to express that sort of feeling. She had a lot of issues with being bullied.
Mhm.
And I was dealing with that all the time with the school. But the bigger issue I thought was, and bullying is a horrible thing. And she eventually changed schools, but at least someone notices you. Can you imagine how awful it must be to feel invisible? And of course, Emily and myself both gave her comfort, but it really was a life changing moment for me. And of course, I wrote a note to the teacher explaining what was going on. They're like, oh, another note from Kathy. Lovely. But I thought it was so important that she was aware of that observation. I wasn't blaming her by any stretch of the
Right.
imagination. They have 30 kids or whatever they're trying to manage, but so she could be aware of it. But I really thought to myself, how do I make something good come out of this really horrible situation? And I decided at that point that I would make sure that nobody who ever came into my field of view, no matter where I was ever going to be made by me to feel invisible.
I love that. I love that because that was a coaching moment for you from your daughter.
Yeah.
But also, I believe it was that coaching moment for Emily when she was sitting there thinking about, I got to do this. And you're about to go into your coaching moment, but nothing could have said it more than that moment.
Yeah. And Emily's a great kid and
Oh,
she
yeah.
does love other people. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
But
But
I used to feel that way in school too. I was like, oh, this is going to slow me down. And so wherever that message came from, right?
yeah, but until you said that, I didn't realize I'd moved around when I was younger and I moved to
Mhm.
some smaller schools. And at first I got bullied because I was the new boy. But then I moved to one school where it's a smaller town, but it was big for us. And two junior highs went into one high school. And typically, if you go into a new school in the middle of the year, everyone knows you're new. But these two junior highs, everyone thought I was from one junior high and the other. And you can imagine freshman year, everyone is so self-conscious and scared. And I was a kid from a really small town. I felt invisible, and I didn't even realize that until you just talked about it. But it was a lonely piece. And one of my mentors to this day, he was my basketball coach, took notice of me. And it was so interesting. I had to say this when I played basketball, and I was on the free throw line in my freshman year. The girls at that school that were cheerleaders, they came up with a different name for me every time because they never asked what my name was. And it did feel something like that, but I got past all of that. It helped me grow, but I also look back now, it's like, wow, that's something when you said that, it's like, yeah, feeling not noticed is actually a bit worse.
Yeah. I luckily was blessed that I didn't experience a lot of those things growing up. I'm sure that he was the gift
Yeah.
to teach me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So give me some other lessons you've learned from the girls, because I know there's probably a lot of them. And I love this because there's a lot of parents out there looking for those nuggets, those moments of parenting. But I also think the kids can teach us so much. And so let's talk about, what have you learned from your kids? What are some of the really deep life lessons?
Yeah. I mean, that is the most impactful one I think that I ever had. I also learned from Emily about perseverance. She had a medical condition that was very painful for her through high school. And high school hard enough, right? With all
Yeah.
the social issues. And she always pushed herself to take very challenging classes and that sort of thing. And she never let it inhibit what she took on. So, for instance, was, she tried out for a play, Steel Magnolias. I'm
I love
sensing
it.
a theme here, all the steel stuff, right? And, uh,
It's
and
great.
she got the lead part. And at the time, she was very sick and was just had these bouts where they just shut her down. And it was 3 nights of the play, and I was just praying every night that she wouldn't have an episode that would stop the play. And she got through those 3 nights with divine intervention or, whatever it was that kept her healthy. And said to me the next day, "Mom, I can't take the pain anymore. I know we wanted to wait till summer to have my surgery, but can you please schedule it now?" She wouldn't miss school for anything in the world. And I thought to myself, wow, you have these beautiful girls. Sometimes we look at girls as being frail, right? Or frilly, whatever the stereotypes you have. And thank goodness we're getting past a lot of those as time goes on. But strong as steel at the core, both of them. And so I thought if she could endure all that physical pain and do what she needed to do, certainly my challenges could be overcome.
Yeah. Well, Kathy, do you think that her perseverance, do you think she learned it from you and your husband? Was it on her own? Was it just something that
Oh,
came to her? What do you think?
goodness. I would love to think that I had influence on it. I'm sure there's something genetically that would say I contributed to it, but I think it's something from within.
From
You
when?
know,
Okay.
I really do. I think
Yeah.
it's a gift. We all get different gifts when we're here on the planet.
Yeah.
And she wasn't given the gift of perfect health during some very formative years.
Mhm.
And so those challenges, you can give up and become a victim or you can persevere. I don't have a big tolerance for victim mentality.
I agree. I agree. Because a victim can't do anything. There are so many things we can do. We're bigger than our circumstances.
Yeah.
And many times those are given to us to either show us that we're bigger. We have to do the work, though. That's the hard part. You have to do the work or it's not going to happen. And
Right.
so that's the hard part about it many times.
And I tried to be a good role model for the girls.
Mhm.
I tried to bring them up with a strong sense of self-efficacy, that what they did made a difference in the world. There's so many more parenting books out now
Right.
that, I may have been able to be a much better mother had I had the benefit of some of the research and things that are out now. We used to sing girl power songs. We'd have song sessions with Aretha Franklin, Respect, and those kinds of things. I always wanted them to feel that they could do whatever they wanted to do, no matter what challenges came their way. But at the end of the day, all the credit goes to them and good Lord for the gifts he gave them.
That's great. Yeah, and I also wanna say this because I know we get a broad group of listeners, and someone may be a real victim about certain things out there, and we're
Mhm.
not diminishing that. We're just saying you have to definitely, we're talking much of what we face is what we do in here with the
Yeah.
victimhood that we do have. One of the things I found is I have taught over the years, many times you'll make a statement and someone blankets it over everything, and we wanna make
Yeah.
sure that That's
No,
clear because I know that's what we're not talking about.
absolutely not. You have to have empathy for other people. And
Absolutely.
as a matter of fact, one of the things that I always teach my children, try to teach my children is be kind to people because you don't know what they're going through outside of where you're interacting with them.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's things in that we can control, things we can't control, and you just got to hand the rest of that over to God. And that's really hard. That's really hard.
That's my word this year is surrender. And that's most people surrender. Yeah. Let go of it because I really don't have power over that. And when I let go, it doesn't have power over me anymore.
Yeah. And that's a
Yeah. Oh,
really hard lesson to learn.
I,
And I'm
I,
still working on it myself when
oh,
challenges come my way.
I think
But
there's different levels of that. Just like the onion, you're going to uncover those the rest of your life. It's about surrender. It's about letting go of those things that not having an attachment to it. Yeah.
and I have met so many people whose life circumstances were much harder than my own or my girls or that sort of thing. And I have seen people overcome some truly amazing things that I try to find inspiration in.
Great.
Yeah.
I want to move over to what you were doing in business, transforming organizations. Let's talk a little about some of the barriers that were your biggest overcomes, that your biggest breakthroughs during that time, whether it's being life mother, wife, something in a community, or actually with an organization, how you're viewed. What were some of the biggest obstacles someone could take and say, wow, I've got that same thing right now. I really wish I could do that. Because I want that person listening right now. I want that person listening to what barriers there are and how you overcame them. Because I know in any transformational work, there's a lot that goes on. Because as I'm doing it, I typically find it starts with me as leading the way. And those things we don't want to have come up and we have to practice them so other people can follow our lead. That's what I teach a mastermind and over, I tell people, I'm doing the same work you are, doing the same work.
Well, absolutely. I think that when you're in a leadership position, and I became a leader in manufacturing type organizations at a fairly young age in engineering and marketing and operations. And I spent most of my time in manufacturing, which is a pretty rough environment, can be.
Yeah.
It's getting a lot better than when I started as a 17-year-old co-op student and
Right.
being the only young female there. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned when I got to the point where I was leading transformations, where I was leading plants or leading multiple plants, was that I had to vote with my calendar. I had to be very accessible to people. I had to let them express their opinions. I had to sometimes let them try things and fail as long as it didn't jeopardize their safety or the customer, which is really hard for someone who's, has perfectionist tendencies and those sorts of things. But the hardest thing, I think, was we would make a change and it wouldn't stick. So, learning how to get an organization to sustain the progress they made was really almost harder than making the change itself.
Yeah.
And so I really learned that you have to stay at it for a while, right? Till it becomes institutional habit. You have to remove old ways of doing things so people don't revert to their comfort zones. Those were things. And one of the reasons that Shannon and I wrote the book was we've been in a lot of roles that aren't traditionally occupied by females.
Mhm.
And we want people to know if we could do it, that they can do it too. What it requires is that you pay attention to relationships. Every single relationship matters, regardless of someone's role or title. You have to face the realities of where you are. There were sometimes I was in really bad circumstances. I luckily worked for big enough companies that I was able to move around if I got someone I wasn't really gelling with and that sort of thing. But sometimes you have to cut the cord and go somewhere else if you're just not philosophically aligned with the leadership. And you have to generate results. At the end of the day, if you're going to thrive in business, You can't just be a nice person who goes around and talks to everybody. You got to be able to get results.
Yeah.
And I also learned that I had to be my authentic self, right? So many of my mentors were much older men than me through the years, and they taught me so much, but I also realized I had to be authentic to who I was. I didn't have the same personalities or ways of getting things done, and I had to become comfortable with doing things in a manner in which I thrived. And I found when I did that, it brought a lot more positive energy to the organization, and the organizations that I was leading thrived as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100% because when you're your authentic self, you're in your real power that was given to you, not to give to others by acquiescing. And it's interesting because you're talking about, you know, being kind. I love that. I tell people be kind all the time, but there's a difference between being kind and nice. One of the stories I told myself was I want to be the nice guy. And then I was living into that story. What do you think happens to nice guys? They
Yeah,
get
they
passed
finished
on, they
last.
get pushed. You're exactly right.
As a
And
thing. So, no, it's
you're exactly right. But in a transformational leadership workshop I took, I changed that internal story to, they said, you can change your results by changing your story. I want to be a jerk. And
right.
I thought, what can I change my story to? I changed it to, I'm going to be an effective person. What does an effective person do? They speak up and they do it respectfully. What does
Yes.
an effective person do? They show up on time, they do their work, they're sought after, they're efficient, and they bring something to the game, and they speak up. They don't acquiesce in difficult situations. And living in that space started to change everything. And also, Kathy, it's interesting because I teach skill sets. Well, so many times we tell people, oh, you need to go have the conversation with someone. Everyone would agree with that. But if you don't have the skill sets, many times we make it worse and we don't know how to get it to better. But
Yeah.
what I've learned when I have the skill sets, my neighbor next door was cutting on our tree yesterday. I went, I go, thank you so much. He goes, when you got the tools, it's easy. I said, you're right. I got no tools when it comes to pruning a tree. We just moved into our house. But same way with skill sets and speaking. If you've got no skills, if you got the right skills, it becomes much easier. You still have to do the work though to get it done.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah.
We are challenged every day, whether we're the official leader or not, to show up as our best selves and contribute. When you talk about being an effective person, right? I always described my leadership style as tough love because you have to do the difficult things from time to time. You can't just be nice and not address performance issues or make tough decisions about businesses that you're going to have to get rid of or businesses that you're going to acquire and how you integrate those. But you can be kind when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And I also felt that even as a leader, you have to be a good follower, right? Everybody has a boss. So even though I have this huge organization I'm in charge of, I am still on a team of other leaders. And so I always felt it was my responsibility when my boss came up with things to provide my perspective on it when it was asked for,
Right.
even if it wasn't popular or didn't agree with what he said. And that wasn't a slip. I never had a female boss in my
Wow.
entire career.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. But once I was heard, if he went a different direction, I got on board and was a good team member. You can't do the silent veto. You can't say yes and then leave the room and not be a part of the team. So there's a lot of skill sets involved in being successful in the business world.
Yeah, I agree with you when you say you've got to speak up because what happens if you don't, you carry that with you where you can't be the team player you need to be later. There's that resentment you've never spoken. And that's there for us to be able to say, I disagree. And this is your call. I just need to be heard around that. And I support you completely. But if I never say that, I hold on to it. And it's like a seed. Anything you bury starts to grow. And that's where
Yes.
resentment comes in. I also like what you said earlier. More important than just getting the change is sustaining the change.
Yeah.
And I find that so true. It does come down to habit. We are creatures of habit. And when I tell people constantly, let's have a conversation with someone, about bad behavior, maybe speaking over you in a meeting.
Mhm.
And you have the conversation, and then the next day they speak over you. That's one of those crucial moments because what we typically go, I knew they wouldn't. And we stop everything. We think that person doesn't respect me. In fact, that person is a person just like you of habit, and
Yeah.
they're not thinking about you and they've forgotten about what that is. They need help, and a respectful reminder. And when I,
Well, right. We know our brain gets neural pathways in it in which habits are formed. So they
exactly,
formed over many years. Just having one conversation does not mean it helps them get awareness,
yeah,
but they've got to develop new behaviors to move past that habit. So, yeah, that's really not a fair expectation.
it's
So,
a
we
nice,
need to help support people.
yeah, it's a
It's when,
naive expectation. It's
yeah,
just naive. Yeah,
it's when people don't want to make an effort to change
yeah,
and support the organization or the behaviors that create well-being for the entire team that they have to be addressed. But people need support to change.
right. It was interesting. A friend of mine was talking about he, I don't know if it's Zig Ziglar or someone else years ago was doing a brainstorming session with organization, all the things we need to be successful, all the things that we need. And they kept going. They had over 108 things. And I think more than 90 something had to do with attitude.
Mm.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
from
That
that
makes
person
so much
wanting to do
sense.
that,
Yeah.
that's got to be that core engine to lead that change. Kathy, I've loved this. Is there anything, story or otherwise, you would like to leave the listenership with as something inspirational, maybe an insight or a little story that we would finish off with an inspirational idea today?
Well, I don't have any more stories particularly on it. I have a million stories. Uh,
Exactly.
but nothing, like I said, more impactful than someone feeling invisible in the presence of others and wanting to avoid that. And so I just love to leave the listeners that to remind them that we have the power within each and every one of us to create high quality connections with everyone we meet every day. It doesn't mean you have to have a 5 hour conversation with them, but you can look people in the eye and smile. And sometimes that may make the whole difference in their world that you'll never know. So don't underestimate your power to bring positive energy and goodwill into the world.
Kathy, thank you so much. Thanks for being a guest this week. And I love that Emily and Claire have taught you so much. And I love what you're doing. Also, you're coming out with a new book. We can talk about it on the other podcast, but I'd like to have you share it here. What is it? Do you know when it's coming out yet?
I've only got 5 chapters in the outline written. I
Well,
am
good.
working on
You're
it.
moving. That's
And
good.
it is the story about my girls, particularly Claire, and of course, Emily and myself, and many cast of characters in it. But she has had some really big challenges in her life, like many people listening probably have. And I think she's surrounded by grace because she is able to navigate through those. And there are so many things about things that have happened to her and protected her and guided her that I don't believe they can be coincidence. And so I really think the story needs to be told so other people can be aware of those sorts of powers and grace in their life as well.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kathy. And viewers, thanks so much for being here. And I'm going to do something I haven't done before. My sister, who produces the show, says, I need to get you to like and subscribe. So if you remember to do that or notify you as we have a new episode, because we're not doing them as regular as we did, we'd love to be a part of your media. And so like and subscribe if you found value. Wish you the best. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time on A Shot of Inspiration. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.